Hello students! Today we are going to be talking about finding peer-reviewed research. So we'll talk a little bit about the peer-reviewed research process, and then most of this video will actually be showing you some of the tools to use to find peer-reviewed research, specifically for papers or projects that you're doing. This will be useful hopefully for this class as well as other classes. So this is one skill that I hope you take from this class to other classes, to your future, that you know where to find some good peer-reviewed research so that you can look that up, because even when you have a reporter reading a research paper then reporting it, they might not be as literate in science as you already are, and so you'll be able to understand better what the paper is actually saying if you can find that actual paper and read it. So let's take these steps. So this is a nice quote from Isaac Newton that really gets at the idea behind peer-reviewed research. If I've seen further, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants. And that is really the case with peer-reviewed research. So we have a broad literature base that people have already done. People have already worked on answering a lot of questions that you might have, whether it be in biology or psychology, whatever field it is. There's already a lot of scientists who have come before to answer a lot of questions. So you take those answers, and maybe some of them, there's still questions within those answers, and you can focus on those. But you're standing on the shoulders of these previous researchers. And that's what this peer-reviewed research is that base of knowledge that you stand on top of to answer new questions or answer questions in different ways. So what you do for a peer review, the actual process of peer review, is when colleagues in a field review a potential paper before publication. So let's say I have a paper. This is actually just notes for this lecture, but let's say I have this paper that I want to publish. I will finish writing it. I'll make any edits that I think are necessary. I'll make sure it's as good as I can make it, that I think it's ready for publishing, and I will send it in to a journal. The editor of that journal will then look at that paper and say, hey, this looks like something we will or would not publish. If it doesn't really fall under the topics that that journal usually publishes in, they might just send it back immediately and say, hey, sorry, this doesn't look like what we usually publish. Send it to another journal. So, but if you send it into a journal that is that it makes sense to publish in, then that editor will say, okay, I will send this to 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 peer reviewers. It depends on the journal how many peer reviewers they use. Most of the journals I've published in and see in psychology generally use 3 peer reviewers, but there are some that I've seen that have only used 2, some that use 4. But the process of peer review is the same, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 people. Essentially, those peers are colleagues in the same field that know a little bit about the topic or a lot about the topic. So sometimes they will be people from your own reference list that you're referencing in your paper. Sometimes it'll be people that are experts in stats that you're doing in your paper. It might be an expert in the methods you use, so that they can have multiple people kind of checking over your paper to make sure everything sounds right. When you do that, some journals will require that you also provide your data to them. So in some cases, they might actually rerun the stats and make sure that you're not lying or that you didn't use, like, you make up your stats and things like that. But that's not as common. The primary, most common thing is to read over the paper, make sure it looks like you're doing things the right way and that you're using the research you should and things like that. So I, as a scientist, study something. I write about those results. I send it into that journal editor. They preview it. They say, yes, this looks like something we'll publish, or no, it's not. Then they send it to 2, 3, or 4 peer reviewers. So these peer reviewers read the article, and then they provide feedback. They can say, hey, this person did a really good job at stepping forward from the field. They understood X, Y, and Z, but they forgot maybe A. So I want them to make some revisions and talk about how this variable might also be related in here, even though it's not one of the primary ones they measured. So that doesn't mean you have to go and redo your study, but just talk about how, oh, this variable also might have impacted. The other person here, maybe this green person, is a methods person. And they say, well, you know, they actually didn't do a true double-blind experiment because of X, Y, and Z. This is actually a single-blind experiment. So change that in your paper. The results are still valid. It's just not a double-blind, so change that phrasing or something like that. Or maybe you have some really serious error that you didn't even realize. Maybe there's a whole bunch of research that already answered this question and you just didn't know enough already to put that into your paper. In that case, that reviewer might say, hey, I'm going to reject this. This is not a useful paper. We already have answers to this. It looks like you didn't do enough background work before your study. And that can be really frustrating. There can be a lot of different reasons, though, that a paper is rejected. But that's one example. So generally, most papers that I've published have gone through 2 rounds of revisions. I've had other colleagues that say they've gone up to 4 rounds of revisions. I can't imagine that. We'll talk about the length of this process right now. But getting it back and forth 4 times to make changes before the journal will publish it. So generally, that first set of revisions I'll get and I'll make most of those changes or explain why, well, that change doesn't actually make sense, and kind of like argue back. And then they'll send a second round of revisions. Generally, those same 3 peer reviewers will review it again and then send it back and say, yep, you've done enough, or make these couple little other tweaks, and then the journal can publish it. So it's a pretty lengthy process. You might study something, write about your results, send it into this editor, and then it can be a while before that paper finally gets published. This is one of the reasons that going to conferences is really good for a scientist, because they can see the results when these people are in the results writing up process before it ever gets published. So obviously there might be things that change from then to the end of the paper being published. New studies might be added, but it can keep you a little more up to date and have kind of that peer review process within a conference setting. So with this, generally what a reviewer will be looking at are things like the background, the lit review of your paper. Are you actually including all the relevant literature? Are you standing on the shoulders of everybody that you should be standing on? Did you forget this body of research on this topic? If so, then maybe your paper needs to be rejected and you should have thought more about it beforehand. So did you miss something that might have already answered these questions? Another thing a reviewer will look at is the methods. Did you use appropriate methods? What measures did you use? Did you use the most appropriate measures? If there's already a really well established and used measure for something, like say depression, for example, but you make up something new, they're probably going to be a lot or very questioning of that. Why didn't you use this standard measure that we know is a valid measure? So because of that, maybe they would reject your paper. But also, why weren't you using that standard measure? So we've talked about good measures. If there's already a good measure, why aren't you using that good measure? If you're making a new measure, well, then that might be why. Did you use the appropriate statistical analysis? Also, when your discussion, you have these results, what are you saying about those results? Are you making claims that go past your results? Are you hedging too much as well? I've had a paper returned once because I was claiming too much beyond what my results show, and then another one that was turned back for revisions because I wasn't being as outgoing with the results. I was hedging a bit too much, they actually said, which was a little surprising to me. So they will be looking at your intro, your methods, your results, your discussion. They'll be looking at all these things to see if there's any errors or anywhere you can improve it. And that's what you're getting with the feedback. You're getting recommendations for improvement. Usually it's literally a Word document with track changes. You might have got that from me for reviewing your papers, or from another one of your professors in another class. And they'll actually recommend, hey, this is where you could make changes, this was confusing, all sorts of things. So peer review can really help catch problems. It helps ensure that whatever research this journal publishes is valid and useful. So especially if they're going to be doing a thorough test, often reviewers will be experts in that field. So it might be an expert, I mentioned this before, if you're doing a paper on mindfulness, it'll probably be researchers who research in mindfulness that are reading your paper. So other people studying that topic. So they should know the measures that are used in the field, the kinds of techniques that are currently used. They should know all your lit review already, essentially. So also you might have a methods expert, someone who knows a lot about doing good methods to review the paper and make sure, did you use the actual most up-to-date methods, or are you like 15 years behind? Because that matters. And then a stats or methods expert. So did you do your stats right? Are you claiming things beyond what your stats actually show? You can get, oftentimes I get like the content, it seems from the comments I get back, that my papers are reviewed by content experts rather than stats or methods experts, but I have had some of those. in the past, especially with a stats heavy paper. So with this, there are some potential problems with peer review. So it is really good. It can help catch things. It can help catch bad research, but there are some problems with it. One is that the process is slow and voluntary in most cases across all science fields. So what that means is when it's voluntary, a busy potential reviewer, so for example, I was actually recently sent a paper to review. So the journal editor said, hey, I think this would be a good fit for our journal, but I know you're an expert in this topic. Will you review this? And gave me a deadline of essentially 2 months to get my review in. So sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's even 4 months. So as a journal author or as a paper author, I send my paper into an editor. They probably review it pretty quickly, but then they send it off to peer reviewers. And they might have anywhere between 2 and 4 months to get that first set of reviews turned around. So as the author, I've sent in this paper, it's all finished work, and now I'm waiting maybe 4 months to get feedback on, should I make revisions? Is this paper going to get rejected? And then if you have 2 rounds of review, on average it's like 3 months turnaround. So if you have 2 rounds of review, it's already been about 6 months since you first turned in that paper before you get the notice from the journal that your paper will get published. So it often takes a little bit less to up to a year from sending in a journal to actually having it published. And that's because it's voluntary. It's useful to review papers because you know what's coming out. You can make the field of science better to help catch errors and make sure things are going well. But it is slow. I can't devote a ton of my time to all the reviews because it's voluntary. I'm not getting paid. Also, another potential problem is that you could have bias from reviewers. Let's say, obviously, scientists, we want to be objective. We want to look at things objectively. We want to do good work. But if you're really tied to an idea, maybe it's an idea you've been working on for a while, and a paper suggests that maybe your main area of work isn't as useful as maybe you thought it was, that could be hard for a person. So if you're challenging the current ideas in a field, there might be a lot of pushback. So for example, I did an intervention to look at a really quick, really cheap, actually free intervention for mindfulness. So I sent it into a big mindfulness journal, and our paper, we said, hey, this doesn't replace the big, long mindfulness courses, but this shows that some little mindfulness exercise that's free and available to everybody could be a good kind of gateway to get into mindfulness and not cost anybody anything. Essentially, it got rejected because they said, well, it doesn't do enough. We already have these big programs. There's no reason to have this little free one. And so I feel like, again, me as the person who wrote this paper and my colleagues that wrote this paper, we really feel like it was a little bit because of bias of the reviewers, that they were actually the people who made these original programs. It's not like, we're not trying to undercut the money you get from these programs. We're just showing that, yeah, a littler program versus an 8-week course of mindfulness that you go multiple times a day can still be helpful. So there could be bias like that. That might not have been bias or other errors with the paper too, like things we could have fixed. But this can also be really good because if you are that careful, if you're that concerned about an area of research, you're going to be more careful. You're going to be critical. You're going to try and be more objective to make sure that the work that's coming out in the field is really good. So the paper I'm reviewing, it's close to my interests around pro-social behavior, heroism, that kind of thing. And so I have a really vested interest in making sure good work gets out into the world. So yes, I'm looking at it critically, but I'm trying to look at it really fairly. I'm trying to make sure the best work possible comes out into the field, which is what you want peer reviewers to do. But it can be possible that you could be biased and want to reject something because it's you're too close to those ideas. So if you're too tied to those ideas, it could be bad. So another potential problem, or actual problem really, this is one of the biggest problems of journals overall, is that journals almost never publish null results. So they don't publish results where the thing didn't work out like you expected or you didn't find a relationship. And that's a problem because sometimes those null results, those results of this relationship didn't exist in this sample or this intervention didn't work in this sample, could be really useful for someone. Let's say you are working in an applied setting. You want to use this new treatment in this particular population. Maybe it's unhoused people, specifically in Salt Lake City, let's say, or it's unhoused people in Atlanta, Georgia, but the tests were done somewhere else. You think maybe this treatment would work, and you try it, and then you find out it doesn't work in your group. It's possible that there might have been a researcher that did that work and wanted to publish that, but since the results are basically that it didn't work out, it wasn't published. So this goes back to editors and journals want to have big, new, you might say sexy ideas in their papers. They want to say, hey, we thought this would work and it worked, or we found this new relationship. We found a relationship working in a different way than we expected to. We found the intervention working in this new population. But when it doesn't work, it could not work because you didn't do a good job methods-wise, but it might also be because it just won't work in that population. So these are some of the questions that you kind of need to answer. Is having those null results out there could be really useful, but journals by and large do not publish those results. So if it didn't work out the way you expected, that might be useful information. It also might mean you just did something wrong. I need to silence my phone really quickly. Thought I had done that already. Sorry. Yeah, so you might have done something wrong, or it might be in that population it doesn't work. But with this, if it's because it doesn't actually work in that population, it's bad because someone might not know that and try it again. They might test and retest this idea. So multiple labs across the country or across the world might be trying to do the same thing, but finding out that it doesn't work. But since there's no paper saying, hey, this doesn't work, then they might all be wasting time and money on things that they could be solving or tweaking it in a way that it will actually work. So again, peer review process, author makes a paper, sends it into an editor, the peer reviewers do a review, send you back feedback. You generally go through about 2 rounds of revisions. One time I had 1 round of revisions only. That was really surprising. Some of my colleagues have had up to 4, and so you make your paper better, make it more clear. So if there's people in the field who didn't understand what you were trying to say in a section of your paper, you definitely want to make sure that you write it more clearly or fix it, right? Generally, they're not going to be asking for collecting additional data, although I have seen that, saying, hey, go back, run another study to confirm this or something like that, but usually that's not the case. So you might get your paper accepted, or with minor revisions, or with major revisions, or it might be rejected. So it can be a long process, but it's a useful process to make sure the science that's out there in a published peer-reviewed journal is of a high caliber and of a high quality. So I like this comic here. So when we're talking about having to go through multiple rounds of revisions, 2 or 3 usually is what I experience over the course of months. Honestly, if I could just run through this gauntlet of people, I think I would probably take that process over the actual revision process that exists. With this, another big problem with peer-reviewed research is that the journals themselves that publish these things are often behind a paywall, so that you as a consumer of that research, as anybody who would want to consume it, they might find the article but have to pay for it. And if you've done any research, gone through databases, clicked on a link from a news article, sometimes it'll say, hey, for access to this article, you've got to pay $30. And that's absurd to pay that much money for this piece of research. So with this, the Salt Lake Community College Library and basically all college libraries pay for fees for many journals. So they pay for tons and tons of journals because they know their students are going to be using lots of journals. So the Salt Lake Community College Library specifically has a psych-specific research page with basically links to databases that are really useful for psych research. So we'll go over that in a minute. But also public libraries do have some access to journals and databases. So if you go to your own city or county library, you probably have access to to a bunch of library databases. You'll probably have to ask a librarian how you can get access. It's probably like a specific set of computers or a specific program on the computers. And you might even be able to do it from home, like put in your library account and then do it from a home computer or something like that. There's different ways that they go about getting like giving you those databases. But I'll show specifically how we do it at Salt Lake Community College. Most other colleges are really similar. But also, you can do this with public libraries. They generally don't have as many, unless you're in a big library system, like say the LA County Library System. It's a big county with a lot of people, so they have a lot of access to more journals than other county libraries might. So you can also email the author directly. Generally, the author can directly share their articles with no problem. So that's not like copyright infringement. If you email the author, they can send it to you. With that being said, I wouldn't rely on that for, say, writing a paper. There have been a few authors that I haven't been able to access their article because maybe it was the translation from German, for example, the English translation. I didn't have access to the database it was in, so I just emailed the author. They sent me the English translation. So that kind of thing can happen, but definitely plan that ahead. If it's 3 days till the paper is due, emailing the author, they probably will not get that article back to you before the deadline of your paper. So there are also preprint databases. Some journals publish the work that is under review, and that can be really useful. This was done a lot during, say, the COVID pandemic, is a lot of the research articles were published as preprint before peer review, so people could work off of them. So that can be good, but obviously those aren't peer reviewed yet. There might be errors, it might be some areas that are confusing that would be taken out by the time it actually got peer reviewed. But these can also publish null results. So there are some journals that in a preprint database, they don't actually send a null result paper to get peer reviewed, but they do publish it in this kind of setting. So that can be really useful. So with this, Google Scholar is one that I primarily use for finding journal articles. It searches really broad and wide. But with this, if you're not going through a library system, oftentimes you won't have the full text available. But you can usually read any abstract and then search through that article in, say, a database, so the Psych database through the school. But often I like to start my searches with Google Scholar, but we'll see a couple databases today. One main point is for any of my classes, do not pay for a journal article. Just don't do it. We can have access to it. The library can request special access. Since I've taught at multiple schools, I have access to a bunch of different schools' databases, and so if there's one that's not active at your school's database, just email me and I can get it, hopefully. I'll definitely be able to get it. With this, don't email me for help like the day before a paper's due. Obviously, if you think this is the best paper for answering this question, hopefully you're finding that well before you're writing that paper, because I'll get that email, I'll get access to it. Sometimes I might have to even request access from my libraries that I have access to, just to make it a little easier. So plan ahead for these things. So on Canvas, you'll probably see something like this, where there's an APA cheat sheet, APA paper template. These are kind of templates and guides to help you write an APA. We will talk more specifically about APA in my classes where that's relevant. But then also finding research video guide here, that can be really useful. There are some other things for quoting and paraphrasing research, some tips that you'll find in Canvas. But the biggest thing I want to do is go to these websites and show you, at least for Salt Lake Community College, where to find research. So this is the main library landing page. So if you just Google Salt Lake Community College Library, this is where you would land. And what you can do is you can click Research Databases, or you can click Research Guides. I'll show you the databases first. So if you click on Databases, basically by letter, and if you know which database you want to go to, so let's say you wanted to go to Google Scholar, you click G, come down here. It doesn't actually look like they've listed Google Scholar. Some semesters it looks like they include the link, or they pay for Google Scholar, or they don't. Looks like right now they're not. So let's click P for psychology. And oh look, we've got PubMed. That could be useful for some psych projects. So primary search, let's check for EBSCO. Here we go, EBSCOhost. So this is a database that collects things from lots of different areas. You can see social sciences, humanities, so this is a good place to go, is EBSCOhost. And it looks like it's going to make me log in again. Alright, so you can go this way and say, hey, I want the, oh, I think I just saw it, APA Psych Info. I want this one. And you can go to it that way through the databases. And this is what the landing page for searching in this database looks like. My recommendation actually though is go to this research guides, and when you click research guides, it'll open up a page like this, and you can say, hey, I'm in a geography class. I want to use databases for that geography class. Obviously for this class, it's a social science, so click that. Then you can click psychology, and this is the specific research guide for psychology. So the librarian here basically collected these things, links directly to this. They have the APA Psych Info, but they actually recommend this one. This one tends to have a little bit broader than just the Psych Info. And you can see it's actually owned by the same company, EBSCO, as the Psych Info. So here you're searching APA Psych Info. Here you would be searching the Psychology and Behavioral Sciences collection. So it's a little bit broader, so this is a good one, and why they recommend it first. PubMed is useful, this one, and then you've got lots of links here and lots of information to give you additional tools to find things. So I will show you how to search on this, but I also first want to show you how to search through Google Scholar. Like I said, that's usually where I do my searching through, and I thought I had it open. Google Scholar. Yep, I usually spell it wrong, but that's okay. So here's Google Scholar. I am currently not signed in with my library profile, so for any of my schools. So this will be pretty similar to what you would see if you just went to Google Scholar. So let's take a potential topic. Let's say we want to look up research on ADHD treatments. Let's say ADHD and Ritalin specifically. And let's say we wanted to look at risk factors. So here we have 16,000 results. I mean, I did use a pretty lengthy search term there, but we have a lot of results. I'm going to show just similar here. ADHD, Ritalin. Did I spell it wrong in the other one? Risk factors. Just to compare something really quick. You can see here I only have 59 results versus here I have 16,000 results. This is one good thing about Google Scholar, is that it searches so wide and so broad. Another thing though is a weakness there is that this is also pulling in books. This sometimes even gets documentaries. It gets, say, magazine articles with Google Scholar. You can also get book reviews, which can be helpful if you're actually looking for a book on a topic. But when we want peer-reviewed research, you might have to come around here and change things. I think right now how to get it to advanced search is to go through here. So, but they often change that in Google Scholar. Sometimes it'll be really quick and easy to access and say set custom range, only do peer-reviewed articles. So I just narrowed it down to just peer-reviewed articles with that. So I would need to make sure that this link actually is just peer-reviewed articles, or this might be book reviews. So one thing that you can do is, as you're searching for a topic, let's say ADHD, Ritalin, risk factors, that's the first thing. Search those terms and then start looking at the titles that you're seeing here. So I saw this title, looked like maybe this is going to be interesting. Anything that has a link over on the side, whether it's PDF or HTML, will open up the full article. So I've actually got a lot here that I can open up. But you see this one, I don't have access to. So anyone that you can open up from here already without going through a library, great. And then I can come here, and this looks like it's, I can't tell, Alternative Medicine Review. I don't know if that is a peer-reviewed journal. a Journal of Clinical Therapeutic. So to find out if this is a peer-reviewed journal, I just search up that journal. And then on their page, there should be somewhere where they talk about their journal specifically and if they do peer review. So about will probably have it. So that is one way to find out, hey, I'm not sure if this is a peer-reviewed journal. I'm still not sure. Let's make sure we get one that does have Journal of Pediatric Healthcare. I'm pretty sure that's going to be peer-reviewed. But I'm also not sure if this was an actual journal publication. Journal of Child Psychotherapy, that one's definitely a peer-reviewed journal. I'm going to click that open. So this is very often what you'll see. So further thinking on ADHD and who is Ritalin for, this was published in 2012. So at the time of recording, this is about 10 years old. So with that, depending on the topic that you're looking at, you might want more recent research, you might want further back research. If you do want to read original research from Freud and that's what your paper is about, then obviously you're going to have stuff that's older. For Ritalin specifically and ADHD, probably things newer than the last 10 years would be more relevant. So you can narrow it down. I can set a custom range. I'll say I don't want anything newer or older than 2016. And that narrows it down even further. So Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, maybe that looks useful. I can also click all 11 versions and maybe there's a better place to get this document. Here we go. So Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, I should double check and just Google that journal, make sure it is peer reviewed. But let's say I think this title sounds really good. I'll open it up, and then the next thing you should do is look at the abstract. All right, so before we do that, I've showed you a couple things from Google Scholar. We'll come back to some of these. Let's look at how you search here in EBSCOhost. So again, it's pretty easy to find peer-reviewed stuff, and to narrow it down, just click that little link. I can also say, hey, for this topic, I want it to be, let's say, newer than 2012. And I want it to be full text. Full text means you can have access to the entire text of the article. So, oh look, this is one that we just opened from Google Scholar. You see they have it in HTML as well as PDF. I do recommend when you find an article, just download the PDF so it's saved on your computer. If you're not going to use it in the future, you can delete it. But it's a lot easier than trying to come back and find things. There are some library tools where you can save these in like your own library account, because here in EBSCO we're linked through the library account. I find it easier to just save the PDFs. If you do use it, great. If you don't, you can just delete the file, or it's just a couple megabytes of extra data. So efficacy of Ritalin in ADHD children under neurofeedback training. And this one's from 2018, so that's a little newer. This might be a little more useful. So I'll click open full text. And here is that document. So here you can do quite a few things. I can download this document, so I can download this journal article. So it's saved on my computer, saved on my device. I can email it to myself, all sorts of things. I can also use this, I think is the right one. So I can export a citation, and just need to make sure I can send it to a reference management software. We'll mention that in a little bit. Or I can just email myself the reference. So I think there's another way to just see. Oh, here we go. That's the link. So then come down here to APA 7th edition. I can literally copy and paste this into my document. So let's make a document. This is my notes for teaching class. So this is my draft of references. And now I paste that in there. It's not completely APA format. Now it is. And now I have my first reference in my paper. So that's one easy way to get it from EBSCO. If you can also get that from the, I think it was this one that we clicked on, right? You can also do that over here. It says cite, so you can just go to that, APA 7th edition, copy that, paste it into your paper. You can also do that through Google Scholar, through this little cite button. So let's go back to all our results. So let's say, hey, I liked this paper a lot, I downloaded it, I'm going to use it. Click that little cite button, and here is the thing. One thing you'll find with this, though, is it's actually missing something. So this journal article does not have a stable link or DOI. Essentially what that means is, because so many articles are just delivered online now, everyone has a unique digital identifier. That's what DOI means, digital object identifier. And so this is a specific number that if you just type that into any reference management software, it's kind of like the ISBN on a textbook, if you know what that does. It will take you directly to this article. So it's also helpful for a researcher. If I wanted to read that article in a reference list, I could copy and paste that DOI, and I could find that article that quickly. So it's really, really useful. But you can see this one I pasted from Google Scholar, it does not have the DOI. Now, some journals don't put out their DOIs, so it's so the database might not pull it out automatically itself. So another thing you can do to find the DOI or stable link, this one was, which article did I just do that for? To study, to party, or both? That's a good question for someone with ADHD. All right, so here is that. If we can find the actual journal article with a PDF, it should have the DOI on it. So here's its DOI. So it's easy enough to come to that article, copy, and then paste it here, and now we've got it. So now we have a DOI for both of those. So just make sure of that if you're copying and pasting a link or the citation from Google Scholar. Oftentimes it doesn't actually include the DOI, versus the databases usually do. Not always, but usually. All right. So we've seen how to find some articles, how to look through some titles. Now let's look at, well, how do we actually determine which is the best article to use? I'm going to close a bunch of these windows so I'm not so confused. And let's get out of the site. So when you find a title that looks like it might be useful for your paper, one of the next things to do is read the entire abstract. They're usually pretty short, so it shouldn't take you too long. And by reading that, you'll get basically an abstract is a summary of the entire paper. So you get a little bit of the intro, a little bit of its methods, results, and discussion. And from that, you should be able to tell, will this paper be useful for me or will it not be useful for me? So I'm not going to read this all right now on camera. But let's say that this is talking about neurofeedback training more than Ritalin and ADHD. So if the focus here is on neurofeedback training and that's not what I'm looking for, then I might say, okay, I'm not going to read that article, might not even download that article. So I'll come back to my results and go through and say, all right, reconsidering the safety profile for stimulant medications of ADHD. Well, if I'm looking for risk factors, this might be a really useful one. It's also pretty new, Ethical Human Psychology and Psychiatry. Never heard of that journal, but that sounds like it might be really useful for what I want to do. So let's come here. So again, here I just opened the main page and I can read the abstract here. In Google Scholar, if you click the title of something, you can almost always read the abstract. And those are the first things. Look for the titles of the paper that look like they might be useful. Read the whole abstract. So as you're searching for articles for your research, those are the first steps. So let's say I read this abstract and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. This almost entirely answers my question. Well, I want to get its citation. Make sure it's the APA 7th edition version, not the AMA, the APA. So I want the citation, I want to download this so I can get the HTML. I'll show you what that looks like. It's generally a little bit different. Here it's just linking to the actual web page it's on, and you can see they've got, here's an intro, method, results, discussion. This is a pretty brief paper. And I'm kind of interested in it. I think I might actually really save this for later. And it looks like the PDF is not going to work. So it's nice that they have HTML and PDF. Oh, there it goes. So if I wanted to read this paper, I could download it. This is the abstract right here, and then papers will jump straight into their introduction. The introduction is where you're talking about background research. Previous research said X, Y, and Z, so that makes me think this might happen or this might work. And then methods is, this is how I did my study. So here we can see this sample was Israeli young adults. We can see the percentages of people in the sample. Sometimes you might also have like other indicators of who these people are, and that might be relevant if you're specifically looking for, if your paper is specifically on ADHD in an Israeli population, well, this paper is going to be really useful. If your paper is going to be on ADHD in a Chinese population, well, this paper might not be as useful. That being said, you may be able to find things in the introduction that lead you to other papers that you should read. So let's say this line, 2 characteristics of the accumulating literature on ADHD meds is that may require us to reconsider the safety profile of stimulant medications. First, there are numerous studies that document multiple risk and adverse effects of these medications, including cardiovascular problems, severe psychiatric reactions. So if you wanted to look at those actual papers that talk about cardiovascular problems and psychiatric relations, go to these articles that they're citing. That's a lot of articles. So that might be a good way to find more research for your paper too. So this is the author's name and the year, so we can find that person in their reference list. So let's see if we can find them really quickly. This one. So here is the actual title of that article, and I think clicking it just brought me to it. It did. Nice. So since I was logged into the database, see here it's giving me this, hey, buy this article. No, don't buy the article. If you think that article is going to be useful for what you want to do, copy this title, go back to your, probably won't pull it up in PsycInfo, but it will probably pull it up here. So you can search for that specific title and see if this database pulls it up. That's not the same article, but it's related. Or you could go to Google Scholar, see if you can get it there. Or again, if you're like, I really want this article, I'm not paying any money for it, send me the title, send me the full APA citation, and I can find it for you. So again, when you're looking for research, first start with looking for the titles, see if it looks like the title is going to be useful for you. Go into it, read the abstract. If the abstract is good, then download that article, get its citation so you can use it, and then from there, read the intro. For most of my classes, not all my classes, my advanced classes, you'll definitely want to do the methods, results, and discussions. I'm planning on using this specific video for guides of finding research in the future too. So if you're in a undergraduate level course, you'll probably want to read the introduction and the discussion. So let's scroll down here. Actually, let's go back to that shorter article that I already had open. Here we go. So abstract right there, introduction right there, and then I'm going to skip the methods. So skip how they did the study. So in some of my courses, you're not going to be the point where you need to know how studies are done. Totally fine. But the intro will have the background information on the study, why they did it, what are the previous researchers, who are they standing on the shoulders of. Results is, all right, these are our statistics, these are our results, this is the percentage of people who did this, or this thing worked, or had this different mean score. And then discussion is results kind of spelled out in more normal English. So this will talk about, well, based on what we know from the lit review and what we found in our study, this is what it means. So reading the abstract, the intro, and the discussion for all my classes is relevant. For a lot of my classes, the methods and results won't be useful. But with this should be less statistics in here. They might be talking about, well, this group failed, or this group didn't fail, this group did better, but the actual numbers are up here in the results section. And so they'll have a conclusion there in the discussion. So those are the parts to focus on when reading a paper. You find a title that looks like it might be useful for you, you read the abstract. If the abstract looks good, download the paper, make sure you get its APA citation. Then from there, read the intro and discussion. In some of my classes, you might also want to go into the methods and results, but for all my classes, abstract, intro, discussion. All right, so you can do that from the library databases. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Make sure you're getting things that are peer reviewed. So if it's not a journal you recognize, which at your point in your scholarly endeavors, it's probably not one you recognize, so just go to their journal page and you can find if it's peer reviewed or not. Anything coming from APA PsycInfo, all the APA journals are peer reviewed, so you already know that. Okay, the last thing, so yeah, don't forget to get the DOI for your reference lists. It's good practice, and it's APA format. All right, yeah, I think that is all for going searching and finding your research. Then you go through the process of reading these things, forming your ideas, starting to write your paper with outlines, things like that. And that'll be other videos. So the last thing I want to talk about is a couple reference managing software. So let's go for the couple that I know of. There are more than these. Mendeley. Mendeley is actually the one I use, but I also know other ones called Zotero. Zotero is another research manager, and then EndNote. I don't think I've used that one, but it does exist. So I believe all of these have a free version. So Mendeley, Zotero, and EndNote. They're essentially a program that you can download, put your PDFs into. It can help you manage your references. It can sometimes even spit out into your paper your whole reference list from all the papers that you're using and referencing from. They also usually have places to take notes in. So I'll show you what Mendeley looks like on my computer. I'll pause the video for a second and log in. All right, so I am all logged into Mendeley on my end. This is what it looks like. I've got basically all the documents opened up right now. I can click on my heroism research folder. I can make my own folders, and I put in documents. I actually just recently reset my computer, like reinstalled my operating system. So a lot of these I need to re-download. But let's say I wanted to go back to this paper. I probably have some notes here that I have written about it. I can also make a new note. So this is what these kind of things are about. I might have some highlights in here from previously, but I can also just highlight and make notes, do things to this article. So obviously you could print out articles if you wanted, highlight physical copies, that kind of thing, but you can also use these reference manager software. You can even put it into, say, a Google Drive. So you have a Google Drive folder with all of your PDFs in there. A lot of PDF programs will let you take notes on the PDFs, so you can do that. I find that these reference managers all do a good job of letting you search through articles, and they're a good tool if you're going to be going into further research. If you're pretty sure you're going to do grad school, download a couple of these, mess around with them, see which one you like best. I really chose Mendeley because when I first started using these programs, Mendeley was the only one that had a Linux program, so that's why I chose it. It was the only option at the time. Now I think Zotero and EndNote will work on Linux, maybe through Wine on Linux too. But if you're using Windows or Mac, probably all of these work. But yeah, figure out which one you like, and that can really help you in doing your research. You can organize it nicely. You can organize it by project. I could have a folder here for a specific assignment. There's a folder here from a lab I worked in for all the articles that we were reading and were relevant for those projects. So again, not like an advertisement for these, just saying, hey, that's a useful tool you could use. So there is a video, actually that one is pretty redundant now as I'm recording this one, but yeah, look through some of these if you want additional help. But I believe I've hit everything that I wanted to with finding good peer-reviewed literature. And remember, the main point of finding this peer-reviewed research, oops, that was too far, is that we are standing on the shoulders of previous researchers who did this work. The introductions of a paper are literally, this is what previous researchers have said about this problem, and this is what I want to do with it for this study. So that's what an intro is about. That's why you get so much of your information for your papers, the students at these levels of courses papers, from your intros. Also your discussions, we'll talk about those as well. So hopefully you learned a little bit about how to find this research. Again, you can use Google Scholar, you can use public library databases in the future to find peer-reviewed research. It can be useful for lots of different areas of life, not just school papers, but if you're going into doing science yourself, you'll definitely want those. If you are wanting to get a paper as evidence to make an argument on social media, you can download the paper and be like, nope, this peer-reviewed piece of research says that I'm right. You could do that. Or let's say you have a project at work and the research is relevant to it. You can print out some of that research or cite some of that research and have it and read it and see what the up-to-date things say. Before making this online course, I did another lit review to see what had changed since the last time I did a fully online course. That's asynchronous, to make sure I was up to date in the research in the area, to make sure I made adjustments to how I did a course. So that's part of being a good user of science, is staying up to date, using these databases, using these tools to read what current researchers have said about these things. All right, that is it for finding good research.